substance equals spin. The propaganda's a win, stress feeding on my tension. My countrymen, they love their fiction. Words are now, it's made with good intentions.
Welcome to 10200, the Independent Media and Politics podcast. We're here for a midweek episode once again. Been having a few less of these recently, but you know that's what winter will do to a podcast. I'm joined by my co-host Mitch. How you doing, Mitch?
G'day. Doing all right. Just living.
It's the best we can hope for. Living, maybe thriving sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes.
And we're also joined by special guest James Harris. Welcome to the podcast, James.
Yeah, great to be here.
Really glad to have you with us this evening. Do you want to give us a quick rundown for our audience about who you are, where you come from?
Yeah, sure. I'm a proud West Aucklander that's been exiled to the lands of Australia. Wear a few different hats, but one of those is as a co-founder of Gaza Ceasefire Pilgrimages, which is a global movement of Christians standing up to the genocide that's happening. And so we've had pilgrimages where we've walked the length of Gaza, and those have happened in over 100 cities, in 20 countries in every continent. And as a part of that, it's just it's partnering and walking alongside Palestinian Christians who are a group that are often made to be so invisible, and often that is by other Christians that are making them invisible. And in many ways, Gaza Ceasefire Pilgrimages started as a movement where in the church, Christian Zionism, which is a theology that supports the political ideology of Zionism, is rampant in many places, and it's the loudest voice in the church, and it's only ever really met by silence. So the pilgrimage movement started as in response to the genocide in Gaza, but also in response to the Christian Zionist narrative, wanting another loud voice. And with that, was welcomed to come over to the West Bank recently. So I just got back a couple of weeks ago from the West Bank, where Palestinian Christian leaders invited a bunch of us over, but said, come and launch the second phase of the pilgrimage movement from Palestine. So we've launched into a second phase. We're inviting people to this time to walk to the offices of their elected officials. So that's already started in San Francisco. A whole lot of people walked to their senator's office just a couple of weeks ago, and same in Canada. Anyway, that's a bit about me and what I'm up to.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm also a long-time friend of Mitch. So Mitch and I grew up as,
snotty nose together.
Yeah.
I think like 16, 17 years now at this point.
Yeah.
Look, glad to have the connection. And thanks for organizing this, Mitch, as well.
Of course.
There's so much happening, and the way that this is being treated by media and politicians to make large amounts of it invisible. And to think about the way that there are even layers within that, and the subsummation of the different religions in order to support the genocide has been one of the nastier narrative tools. Rather than some of the more brute force, just bots and sock puppets being all over Twitter. This is like an institutional tool that's being used to garner support in the United States, or to drive policy in Israel and the United States for the destruction of Gaza. But then, as you say, to invisibilize this whole subsection of Palestinian society, and in service of that.
And Christian Zionism is a massive, massive issue. And I think even within movements for justice and self-determination in Palestine, I think sometimes people miss just how big it is. When I arrived this time I've been multiple times. Last time I was in Palestine was 2019, and I was held for quite a long time before they finally let me in. This time, I don't know how, but they just let me straight in. I flew into Tel Aviv, caught the train from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and I was walking from the train ends in West Jerusalem I decided to walk from West Jerusalem to East Jerusalem. And just before you cross into East Jerusalem, there was this massive billboard outside the Friends of Zion Museum that said, hundreds of millions of evangelicals have your back. And then there was like Israel prayer team. And the sad thing is that's the reality. Like I was struck by like they're not wrong. And I think people even in the movements that are for a just peace in Palestine often miss that dynamic, that there are far more Christian Zionists in the world than there are Jewish Zionists. And in many ways that Christian movement provides the political cover for this to operate.
Are you able to go into that a little bit? Because I think our audience are going to be quite au fait with what Israeli Zionism is. That's how we talk about the Zionist state and the Zionist political agenda. But as you say, the Christian Zionism will get a side mention.
Mm-hmm.
So what is that, and how is it operating here?
Yeah, sure. I think the first thing to mention, which I think is the perfect quote that sums this up, or it sums up the importance of this, is from Mitri Rahib, who's a Palestinian theologian, who says that Christian Zionism is the software that powers the hardware of the occupation. And then he also talks about how the hardware is provided by the international community. But that software of Christian Zionism comes from a theological position that's relatively new in church history, starting within the last few hundred years. And it's a belief that it stems from a belief that Jewish people must take back the entire Holy Land, the entire ancient lands of Israel, in order for Jesus to return one day. So it's this like apocalyptic vision, essentially. And within it, so it comes from this theological position. It largely comes from this theological position called dispensationalism, which believes that God is moving in these different periods of time. And it's, if you know that the meme of like Charlie from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia with the wall of like different, that just with his crazy face, it's kind of like, it's basically a pick and mix theology where they take different parts of the Bible and they say, this said this here in the Old Testament, that says this. And it's very, dispensationalists would hate me saying this, but it's kind of like conspiracy theory Christianity.
QAnon Christianity.
Yeah. And that's where so many of people that had that theology fell into the traps of QAnon and ended up anti-vaxxers and all of these different things. There's a whole load of crazy beliefs within it. And but a part of the issue with Christian Zionism is that voice is so loud. And then that is met mostly by silence from the rest of the church, which is this kind of complicit endorsing. It's like if you're not against it, then you're kind of passively for it. And I think that's met by the fact that it's really interesting because I'm like a deeply passionate, devout Christian. And so I kind of can't talk about this without getting a little bit like Jesus-y, so excuse me to the audience. Like, Jesus had 12 disciples, and one of them was Simon the Zealot. And the Zealots were a group that wanted to violently overthrow the Roman Empire. Like Jesus was born into and lived under occupation. And one of his disciples was a part of the sect that were like, we're going to violently overthrow the Roman Empire. And Jesus said, no, like those who live by the sword die by the sword. This is about subverting power, and true power comes through serving the poor. True power comes through all these other things. And so anyway, he's known as Simon the Zealot, but he gave up being a zealot. But then Jesus also said, within your lifetime, you will see the destruction of the temple. And in 66, 67 AD, the Zealots rose up, and that was, the first Jewish revolt. And we had the destruction of the temple, as Jesus had said would happen, and Jewish people scattered, many into Middle East, North Africa, but others up into Europe. And I say all of this to say that in the Muslim world and in throughout Middle East and North Africa, Jewish people were treated pretty well. Like that's not like a blanket statement. Sure, there were things, like where it wasn't great, but especially compared to Christian Europe, where in Christian Europe, Jewish people were essentially persecuted for 2,000 years and culminated in the horrors of the Holocaust. And so I think you've got the extremely loud Christian Zionist voice saying Jewish people need to return to the Holy Land, take the whole thing back. And then you've got the rest of the church who are steeped in 2,000 years of persecution in Europe, and afraid to speak out for one, I think, for the powerful Christian Zionists, not wanting to, I guess, have the flack from that, but also not wanting to be seen to be anti-Semitic. And so Palestinian theologians talk about how, in Christianity, there's the idea of the atonement, that, a sacrifice is made to make things right. And they're like Palestinians being made to atone for the sins of Christian Europe. That we're the ones paying the price for you to repent for what happened, not just in the Holocaust, but 2,000 years of persecution. So it's heavy, but the Christian, whether it's the hardcore Zionists or the radical neutrality of the rest of the church, really provides the political cover. It's not just having Jewish Zionists as politicians. Often the issue is the Christian politicians or the culturally Christian politicians who have AIPAC in their ear or have all these different things.
And I'd argue they barely need AIPAC in their ear.
Yeah.
This has been a consistent, basically, or being smeared as anti-Semitic meme, right? That Israel and AIPAC control the US. And like, no, they don't need to do that. But these guys already believe the stuff. They will take extra money to vote in the direction that AIPAC asks them to. But they don't need that to do so. They already believe it very strongly. And the rise of the Christian right in the United States, you can track this directly back like 50, 60, 70 years ago, and the way in which the policy approach to Israel has changed. I think, even Ronald Reagan has had similar situations in terms of Israel on the brink of doing a major atrocity and just pulled support in a way that seems unimaginable for a democratic president to do.
Yeah, it's and Christian nationalism is a major issue for the US, and it seeps its way in Australia and New Zealand, not to the same extent, but the Christian kind of political right are what I would call selective fundamentalists. They'll read certain parts of scripture and say it's fundamental, but we'll leave out other parts. A classic is like Matthew 25. They'll talk about hell is eternal. It's this place of eternal conscious torment, which I disagree with, and they'll use Matthew 25 as an example. I'm like, what does it actually say there? And what it does say is that if you don't care for the poor, if you don't clothe the sick, if you don't clothe the naked, if you don't visit the prisoner, if you don't welcome the stranger, that you're going to go to hell and it's eternal. And they'll go, oh no, but that part's figurative. But further down where it says hell is eternal, that's the part that is literal. And so you've got what I wouldn't just call fundamentalists, but selective fundamentalists. Because I think I would consider myself, which would piss off a bunch of evangelicals. I'd consider myself a relatively conservative evangelical, but in many ways that's a reclaiming of the label rather than a descriptor of what that means in other places.
I think there's some good background for how these things interact. So you're in the West Bank and you're there for this pilgrimage. I guess we can get into what that was like, what you saw, and you'd just seen this billboard as you're entering.
Yeah, yeah,
And this is
yeah.
another one of these things, like if you take stuff directly from Israel, like this is how we've done a lot of our reporting, or the way that we've formed a lot of views around what's happening there is just go and listen to the Israeli politicians talking on their national programs. Just go and see the things they're putting in their papers, they're putting on their billboards, and this seems to be much the same.
Yeah, definitely. And Christian voices aren't shying away on the right from saying some horrible things and calling for the destruction of Gaza. You had a Republican senator, I think he was a senator, who used to be a church pastor that called for, we need to do it like Nagasaki and Hiroshima, like get it over quick. These things aren't being shied away from by Christian voices, and it's really scary, and it completely goes against the way of Jesus. And so yeah, it's not only that, and one of the things being in the West Bank, I had someone who, I can't mention the organization, but a really significant Christian organization that does some amazing work supporting Palestinians in the West Bank. And she said to me, the issue that we have, one of the issues we have at the moment is that Gaza is just so horrific. Like, it's actually unimaginable what is going on. But people are talking about Gaza being the distraction and the West Bank being the prize. That by the time the destruction has finished in Gaza, more and more land will have just been taken and annexed, and I got to see it with my own eyes, and it wasn't my first time there, but seeing it again. The last time I was there was 2019. I was just in East Jerusalem. Prior to that, I was in the West Bank for 6 weeks in 2014, which was when Gaza was under siege as well, and what Israel called Operation Protective Edge. And people ask me, like, what's the difference in 10 years that you see? And I'm just like, the expansion of the settlements is full on to see. And the other thing is just the sheer amount of Israeli flags flying in Palestinian territory. Like, it's almost like the amount of flags is almost comical, but so like heartbreaking to go. I'm literally driving through Palestine right now, and in eye shot I can probably see 500 flags. It's nuts, absolutely nuts. Yeah, this time I spent 4 days of that was at Christ at the Checkpoint, which is a Bethlehem Bible College, which is an evangelical Bible college, run a conference called Christ at the Checkpoint. And to them, they're like, theology is not an academic exercise. What you believe about the covenants has a daily impact on my life. What you believe about, so many of these things which could be minute, or you have a Bible study, you're like, oh, it doesn't really matter. Like, for them, it really does matter. It has massive implications. Spent 4 days there alongside 150 other international Christians that had come and traveled to Palestine to hear from Palestinian Christians, but just sort of be there in solidarity with them. And as a part of that, we sort of launched the second phase of the pilgrimages, and then traveled to Hebron, which is one of the more heated places in the West Bank. It's the one city in the West Bank where there are Israeli settlements right in the center of the city in Hebron. And I spent a bunch of time there 10 years ago, and a friend of ours who really showed us the daily reality of living under occupation in 2014, he said, go tell my story to anyone who will listen. And then in 2015, he was tear gassed, had a heart attack, and couldn't get through the checkpoint to the ambulance on the other side in time. So his neighborhood, only Israeli cars can enter. Everything's mediated by checkpoints. By the time so in 2014, they actually fully had banned him from, because he was an activist, a Palestinian activist, they'd banned him from going through the checkpoints. So he was like stuck in his own little prison, just in this little neighborhood. His neighbor was the head of the Jewish Defense League, which even the US have designated a terrorist organization. 1994, Barak Goldstein, who was an IDF soldier, but also a settler, opened fire at Ibrahimi Mosque, killing 29 worshippers and injuring 100 others. So like, this was his neighbor, was the head of this organization. Yeah, and in 2015 he died as a well, he was killed by the occupation. So I went this time to go see his wife and kind of pay my condolences, and it was heavy. It was really heavy. But it was beautiful to be together again. I'll get to the next day in a second. The next day we actually kind of we went to a settlement and pretended we wanted to see what Christian support for the settlements actually looked like, and so we didn't share exactly our perspective at all, but we sort of just said, "Hey, tell us about this." Yeah, it's worth mentioning. I just feel like it. Yeah, we visited Ibrahimi Mosque. It's the cave of the patriarchs, as it's known in Judaism. So you've got the tomb of Abraham there, Sarah, Leah, I think Joseph, Jacob. Like it's a very, very significant site for the three faiths. And that's the site of the massacre that happened in 1994. The mosque was shut for 6 months after that. So before that time, it was it was a church for a while, going back, over a millennia.
Just a while.
Yeah, so it was a church for a little bit, and then it was a mosque, and then under the Crusaders, it was a church again, and then it was a mosque, and stayed a mosque. But then after the 1967 war, and the occupation of the West Bank, they made it that Jewish people could come and pray there as well. So they would pray, it would be Muslims at the front, Jewish people at the back. But since the massacre in 1994, they had it closed for 6 months, and then they put in a divider, like a bulletproof divider. So now it's half synagogue, half mosque. And so we had a guide who was there showing us around. So this time I'd never been before. So this time we went and had this local Palestinian man showing us around, and he was mostly showing, this is the tomb of Abraham and things like that. And then we asked what happened in 1994. Could you tell us about that? And he took us into the main part of the mosque, and he was explaining what happened. There was details that I didn't know, like including that Barak Goldstein was wearing his IDF uniform when he committed the massacre.
I had also not heard that.
Yeah, and so he's telling us this, and he's like quite nonchalantly, he's like, "So I was over there," and I'm like, "Wait, you were?" Yeah, and he was a survivor of the massacre and was able to sort of tell us from his perspective exactly how it went down. Yeah, so and it's crazy now that there's the bulletproof divider, and you've got half synagogue where it's covered in Israeli flags from the outside. Yeah, it's full on, really full on. Yeah, so yeah, a very heavy day in Hebron, and then the day after we visited an Israeli settlement.
Before we get into kind of the settlement stuff, I do want to swing back to a point that you were making around the prize being the West Bank, because this is something that has been a constant fixture of people trying to push back Israeli narratives around it just being about Hamas, right?
Yeah.
Is okay. So yeah, what about these 100 people that were killed in the West Bank, or 1,000 people who have now been kidnapped from the West Bank?
Yeah.
That's not where Hamas is. And alongside that, again, on Israeli media, you have politicians like Ben Gvir openly saying, we're going to go and make more settlements. We're going to seize more land. We're going to annex more land. There are like pictures of them handing out assault weapons.
Yeah, didn't they have they announced 10,000 rifles would be. Yeah.
How do you, or is there a sense of that from the people there as well? How do they, because obviously this, and it's not atrocity medals.
Yeah.
But this genocide is happening in Gaza. Like 80%, I think, of buildings have been destroyed, and they know what's coming in the West Bank, I imagine. There's this continued occupation. They've got a government, such as it is, that works with the occupation to suppress them and to suppress Palestinian self-determination, and it's just increased to such a huge degree over the last 6 or 7 months.
Yeah, I think the first thing you hear that I heard from Palestinians in the West Bank, first and foremost, is solidarity with those in Gaza and acknowledging just absolutely just how horrific it is. But then you also hear that there's been a massive increase in checkpoints in the West Bank prior to and it's that whole thing of debunking. There was a ceasefire on October 6th. On October 6th, it was already the deadliest year for Palestinians, I think since like 2005, and you had, I guess, the automation of, you've got the AI cannons and all of that stuff in Gaza, so that actually withdrawn 2 battalions. That the settlement expansions were so intense that they'd withdrawn 2 battalions from Gaza to be in the West Bank because there was, so much settlement activity that was happening there that they needed that. So it's intense and it's dire. I think kids in the West Bank have made it to school. I think that it's like 50% of the days since October 7th because it's often just too dangerous and things like that. So it's really things are unimaginable in Gaza, and things are just so dire in the West Bank as well. So
Yeah. Even with it being mostly ignored by Western media, every so often you'll still see a picture come up of kind of gangs of Israelis roaming and beating up Palestinians.
oh yeah, it's the amount of attacks by settlers is just astronomical, especially the West Bank is broken up into sort of area A, B, and C. So area A being under the full control of Palestinians, or the Palestinian Authority, and then area B and C. B's like sort of municipal control of the Palestinians, but security control of the Israeli forces, and then area C is the full control of the Israelis. I think what people don't get when you talk about the West Bank, when you're like, oh yeah, it's Palestinian territory, yeah, but like area C is 60% of the West Bank. So a huge majority, and then area A, where it's the full control of the Palestinian Authority, is only 18%. And then that's broken up into like little islands throughout. So like the freedom of movement is so restricted, and the settlement expansion is growing so much and with that comes more soldiers, becomes more restrictions, becomes all of that. So increasingly area A is just more and more densely packed. You'll notice visiting cities like Hebron, Bethlehem, Ramallah, that it's people walk on the road next to cars because it's just like there's just no space. Yeah, no, it's horrific. And then I think the economic impact of the war on the West Bank's massive as well. So another thing that I'd never seen before was like beggars. People literally just coming up being like, I need money, like I can't work, I need to support my family. Like I've never experienced that before. So yeah, it's intense and it's dire. And I think what the Western Church miss is that is the direct impact of Christian Zionism. Because Christian Zionism says that Jewish people need to control the entire land from the river to the sea. And actually, if you talk to the hardcore Zionists, they'll give the full biblical Israel, which includes all of Lebanon, a big swaths of Jordan, swaths of Syria, huge part of Egypt. And to them, they're like, it just has to happen. And they'll say that, God moves in different ways at different times. And right now it's a time where, it's a reclaiming of the land. And that's where you get like Netanyahu using things like Amalek, but you hear Christians using the same thing where, Hashem showed me who was the Palestinian man who was killed at the checkpoint. He showed me a video of his neighbors saying, when we entered the land the first time, God said, kill every man, woman, child, every animal, and we're going to do it again. And you have Christian Zionists that are like, this is what's happening. It's a return to the land, and basically to them it needs to happen no matter the cost. And the cost is Palestinian lives.
It is heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like to me, I'm just like, oh, am I reading a different Bible? Like, it's madness.
This is
And
when things get co-opted, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of the really powerful Christian Zionists are televangelicals
Yeah,
people.
yeah,
You know, like they're not in it for the Christianity. They're in it for money and power as much as anything else.
yeah, yeah. And I think like a lot of Christian scholars talk about what they call the great apostasy, or the Constantinian shift, that the entire New Testament and what the Old Testament points towards is this idea that Jesus is king and he's ushered in his kingdom, and his kingdom reigns in people's hearts, and it's of peace, justice, love, and it challenges injustice. And the entire New Testament pits the kingdom against the empire, and that kingdom and empire are two things at odds with each other: the kingdom of God and empire. And then you had the Roman Emperor Constantine, who supposedly became a Christian and kind of co-opted Christianity into the empire. So a lot of theologians talk about that as the great apostasy, where at that point had forsaken the central point, a part of the religion, which at that point Jesus is dethroned as king. And we have the same thing playing out in these places where the whole Christian nationalist movement, from my perspective, theologically it dethrones Jesus as king. And at that point it's no longer, it's a Christian sect, like it's a co-opting of Christianity for other means rather than Christian in and of itself.
And this is where we get into some of the way in which this discourse has developed, right? And I'm always somewhat uncomfortable talking about things in terms of discourse and narratives during an ongoing genocide, but the way in which we interpret this and the way in which it's justified to us, I think it's important to try and unpick that as well. And we've seen this huge rise in Islamophobia alongside this clash of civilizations discourse, where you've got the really hardcore white supremacists and white nationalists talking about the Crusades again. But in reality, the Middle East has never really been like that. And it's this invisibilization of the different religions there and the different people that is leading into this.
Even visiting the Church of the Nativity, which is where tradition says Jesus was born, in the cave, which is in the bottom of the church. And it's the longest surviving congregation. So there are it's always been, it's not just like a tourist attraction. Like people worship there daily and have for 1800 years or something. As you go into the church, there's this giant door that the Armenians were gifting to the church. And Saladin, who conquered the Crusaders, said, if this is being gifted to the church, I want input as well. So half the door is from the Armenians and half is from Saladin, the Muslims. And they're venerating Jesus, but at the same time, Saladin, the Crusaders came and they built a Roman Catholic part of the church, and he came and destroyed that part of, this is, going back into the Crusades, destroyed that part of the church. And for him, it was the sign of full solidarity with Christians, but against the European occupation of the Holy Land. And it's not just the invisibilization of Palestinian Christians, but I think Arab and Eastern Christianity as a whole. And the fact it's this missing the fact that Christianity is an Eastern religion at its heart. That's how it started and spread into the West. So you've got that. And then to contrast exactly what you said, this kind of idea of the clash of civilizations. I was a part of a letter of 120 church leaders in Australia that signed a pretty vanilla letter calling for a ceasefire. And we were called out on Christian radio. The tagline was Christian leaders caught up in anti-Semitism. Listening to it, the justification and what they talked about is they were that Hamas want to destroy Israel and they want to destroy the Jewish people. And then next it's coming for Judeo-Christian values.
Yeah.
It's anyone espousing
Western values as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And
euphemism.
And I think that's some of the things that are really being peddled. At the same time, you have rising, and this just isn't talked about, like rising anti-Christian movements in the Holy Land. So you've got like the desecration of Christian graves. You've got all the stuff happening with the Armenian Quarter in East Jerusalem, where settlers are trying to take over 25% of the Armenian Quarter, which is one of the Christian sort of areas in Jerusalem. And East Jerusalem's been under the status quo, where everyone has their part, and it's been a status quo since the Ottoman Empire, saying, hey, so anyway, that you've got that happening in Nablus at Jacob's Well, the church there, which is the city we were in 2014. We were based there for 6 weeks. The church in Nablus has Jacob's Well, where Jesus met the Samaritan woman at the well, but it's also a holy site in Judaism. The priest there was hacked to death by a rabbi. This was the previous priest. The current priest has had 32 assassination attempts on his life. And these things aren't talked about. Like, and I'm 100% on board that like there's a rise in a rise in Islamophobia around the world. But what Christians in the West aren't reckoning with is that actually in what we call the Holy Land, there's a rise of there's a whole anti-Christian movement within Zionism, because it's not just that they need Muslims to leave. It's like full Jewish control. Yeah, it's hectic.
Let's I think it's probably a good place to kick off your travels into a settlement.
Traveling to a settlement was crazy. We'd heard about an organization that their entire thing is they're Jewish settlers, but they have an organization taking Christian support to support the settlement movement. So we got in touch and didn't tell them our perspective on things, but we wanted to see firsthand what this looks like. So we rented a car we left the West Bank and went into West Jerusalem and rented a car with Israeli plates to drive out to the settlement. And we get there, go into the office, and there's a few things that stick right out to me. One is the assault rifle sitting on his chair, which made me a little bit nervous. And then behind him is a photo written in the sand at the beach. I can only guess that it's the beach in Gaza. It said Gush Katif forever. And Gush Katif was the block of settlements that used to exist in Gaza. And settlers refer to Gaza as Gush Katif. So he walks into the office and says, like, say hello to my rifle. I'm like, shit.
That just seems far too on the nose.
Yeah, it was like,
it's ludicrous.
Yeah, I've got photos, and like it was, and then also on the wall behind us is what kind of resembled like people taking like a school photo or something, like class photo. All these guys in full military get up, bulletproof vest. They're wearing army kind of camouflage and things, and rifles. So we're asking him about it, and he was saying, oh no, that's not the IDF, that's like our civilian security team. So like each of these settlements have their own like civilian. I'm like, okay, you're militia. Yeah, got it. And then he's like, oh, should we get in your car? I don't know why it was my car, but he was like, hey, should we get in your car and we'll drive around and I can show you, like, we'll show you the settlement and we'll show you where we're expanding and things like that. And so we get in the car and he takes his rifle with him. So I'm driving and he's got his like his rifle on him the whole time. First he takes us to a site in antiquity. I'll show you a site of antiquity that kind of proves our connection to the land. And I was actually like genuinely interested. I thought I was going to see something of religious significance. We get to this old, there's kind of an old village, I guess, built with stone houses and things that were kind of, overgrown. And he goes, look, there's these, it's around 2,000 years old. And there's actually a wine press here. So what does that prove? And we're like, I don't know. And he's like, well, Muslims don't drink wine. So this proves that this was a Jewish village. And I'm like, actually, I think that might be stronger evidence that this was a Christian village. I didn't say that to him, while he was holding his rifle. And so our whole thing was like, let's smile and nod. The whole day, just smile and nod and just see what he says. And it got harder and harder throughout the day. So then he took us, he's like, I want to show you where we're expanding, and took us to what's known in the international communities as an outpost, where he was explaining that this doesn't have the full support of the Israeli government. We've moved into this territory, and we've set up caravans, and we have people that are staying here. And he was explaining, you know, the Israeli government can't keep up with our need to expand. So we stay here until we can get a permit to build a small structure. And then once we've been here for long enough, we can build a bigger structure. And of course, he didn't share the things that exist in Israeli law, where if agricultural land isn't used for long enough, it can be turned into a settlement, things like that. So the crucial thing for people to understand, especially I think for Christians to understand, is he then explained that because it doesn't have the full support of the Israeli army, the Israeli Defense Force, as many people talk about it, Israeli Occupation Force, or is it probably more better termed, the Israeli Occupation Force? Because it's an illegal outpost, it's even illegal under Israeli law. So he's like, that's where we need our security team, you know. And he's like mentioned the photo in the office of the security team, and he's like, and that's actually where a lot of the Christian support goes through our organization, is to fund and to train our security teams. So what that means in real terms is Christians who are probably really well-meaning, that have like, of course we should support Israel, of course we should support their security, putting money into funding militias that are forcefully confiscating Palestinian land, not only against international law, but against Israeli law. Although the Israeli government sort of let it happen because it's helpful for the settlement expansions to them.
I remember, like, in the last maybe in the last month, there was this whole thing about the illegal settlements, right? And sanctioning people involved with the settler movement. And then that just suddenly disappeared. None of those sanctions really stuck at all.
Yeah, it's something that speaking to people in the kind of political advocacy space, they're like, this is actually something that people should be focusing on, is sanctioning settlers, because it's getting more traction than, obviously, the genocide in Gaza is just, like, as I've mentioned, unspeakable, unimaginable, and needs to be condemned at every level, and everything possible to stop it needs to happen. But to do that, Western governments need to call out the perpetrator, which is the state of Israel. But somehow you saw the US government, and it was 4 individual settlers, sanctioned a few settlers, and you've seen similar things in Europe. So people in the political advocacy space are saying, alongside everything we're doing in Gaza, we should be pushing governments to sanction settlers, because it's like, oh, we're not going to call for a ceasefire, or we're not going to stop weapons exports to Israel, but we can sanction this non-state actor. You know, it's kind of like a softer, easier thing to do. So, like, I actually think it's an important thing to be pushing, that we sanctions on settlers, settler organizations, sanctions on Christian organizations that are sending money to support the settlements.
And I guess
it's all
education
really important. As
well, so that people understand exactly how those organizations are being funded.
I met with one of the pastors at my church today. I just bumped into him in a coffee shop, and he's like, how you been? I was like, oh, you know, it's just in the West Bank, we're talking about it. And I was like, this is what Christian support looks like. You know, it's funding militias to confiscate Palestinian land. And even if it's not, it's theologically endorsing that happening. Because to theologically say that Jewish people need to control the whole land, that this needs to become, that there's really only one way that's happening, and that's through genocidal tactics.
Shit.
Yeah, and as a Christian, I'm so happy to call out the church. Like, it's what needs to happen. And Palestinian Christians are speaking, so speaking with urgency about what's happening, obviously. And it's up to the church to listen. And I think history is going to judge Christians the most harshly when they look back at this, I think.
So how come this guy didn't peg you as being activists of some sort?
So he asked us things like, what are you doing here in Israel? And I said, you know, I think it's really important to be here in solidarity especially at this time. And he looked at me like, my man. I think he fist bumped me, you know, thinking like that my solidarity was with him. But our thing was, yeah, just smile and nod.
I guess within that kind of zealotry, you do start hearing what you want to hear, right?
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, there were things that I mentioned that I think we didn't lie to him once, but we didn't fully reveal our truth, you know. And we're like, we'll just, yeah, smile and nod and let him talk. And he did, you know. And he talked about Gush Katif a lot, the settlements in Gaza, the need for that for their own security. He talked about, didn't really talk about Palestinians. He talked about Arabs, and you know, the threat that they are. He talked about, you know, the fact that his son has to go to school on a bulletproof bus, because of the security threat of Arabs or of Palestinians.
Of having
And he
an
was like,
armed
but
militia outpost and
yeah,
trying to
and,
confiscate people's land.
and he's saying like, why would I do that? Like, why would I put my son through this to have to go to school on a bulletproof bus? And he's like, the only answer is we're mad. He's like, we're absolutely crazy. He's like, I am mad. And I'm like, stop saying that while you're holding a rifle. But he's like, we truly believe that God is calling us to this. And that's where I left the day being like, I feel like I spent the day with a Taliban member, like a religious extremist that is committing acts of violence against civilian populations, but is completely indoctrinated into their way of thinking. I was struck, and this is something that like maybe not everyone would agree with, and this is where it's, I guess, thinking like, what's the solution to all of this? Like, I also spent a day at Ida camp, which is the refugee camp in Bethlehem. There's 8,000 people, the most tear-gassed place on the planet, according to the UN. And it's essentially a slum, where people were forced out from their houses in 1948. They thought they'd be there for a couple of months while the war happened and they'll be able to go home. So the classic story, people lock their front doors with the big old keys you would have had in 1948. Lock the door, took the key with them because I'm going to return one day. And so those keys have become a symbol of return, you know. And so Ida camp, you've got the entrance to it is a massive keyhole with a giant key, like this kind of massive, beautiful mural, about, you know, like about the return that will happen one day. And at the same time, and I was feeling a despair, really, you know, like, because that land now is Israel proper, and you've got these people that are like, you know, a generation, 2 generations on, that are just like, every day we will return, we will return, we will return, and the resolve is only getting stronger. And then this is the one thing where the settler may have changed my mind slightly. I wasn't expecting this, as he showed us a map of the Jewish holy sites. And you've got Jerusalem, which is, you know, obviously the most holy site. And then he's like, we've got Jacob's Well, Cave of the Patriarchs in Hebron. You got the site of Jacob's dreaming. You've got Shiloh. You've got all these places. And he's like, they're all in the West Bank. And so he's like, we will always occupy this land. There's no, you know, like, we need to access our holy sites, is essentially was one of his arguments. And so I was struck by the juxtaposition of having Jewish Israelis in the West Bank refusing to leave. And there's over 500,000 of them now. And then you've got 70% of Gaza's population who are refugees from 1948. And you've got Ida camp with the giant key. You've got 500,000 Palestinian refugees still in Lebanon. You know, like this kind of right to return and this need to return to the land of what is now Israel proper. And then you've got, it's like an unstoppable force and an immovable object. You've got the settlers who are like, these are our holy sites and we should be able to access them. And to a certain extent, in a just and equitable land, Jewish people should be able to access their holy sites. And so when you've got a two-state solution that has a partition and is like, this is Palestine, you're always going to have, more than anything, you're always going to have the Jewish extremists who are going to make their way back into the West Bank. And it's always going to happen by force. It's always going to be, you know, so that's where I think things like, I don't know if you've come across like the political movement, like a Land for All, which is, you know, a federation of Israel and Palestine, where both people have self-determination. There's a federal government, and you've got two states that exist.
A non-apartheid state, right? Like,
yeah.
which,
Two states that exist with some sense of identity and self-determination, and you've got Jewish people that can access the Cave of the Patriarchs. They can go and pray at Abraham's tomb. They can go and visit Jacob's well. And you've got all of these refugees that can return to their homelands. And so that was one thing that I wouldn't say, oh, he changed my mind, but made me go, actually.
I don't think that was the intent of his, right?
Yeah. And I think the thing for me is like, actually an end to an apartheid regime means that Jewish people like from Tel Aviv can go, sweet, I'm going to go visit Abraham's tomb in Hebron, and I can do that without imposing. The only way that works now is that the IDF have full military control of the Cave of the Patriarchs. You have the Jewish settlers around there that impose the most intense apartheid right next to Abraham's tomb. I'm like, actually, a land for all and the end of an apartheid state and a complete reformation provides more equitable access for Jewish people to their own holy sites.
And this is that huge difference between the Zionist Israeli state and the Jewish people, right?
Exactly.
Or the Jewish religion. Because there are secular Jewish people as well, who this isn't necessarily relevant to.
Yeah. Secular Jewish people and non-Zionist religious Jews that are anti the occupation, but would love to, if it were just and equitable, would love to visit these sites. But currently it's not. The only way they can do that is by endorsing and supporting and benefiting from a very, very brutal genocidal regime.
And this is where, like, probably won't get into it in detail, but you're talking about the anti-Christian stuff happening there as at the moment now. But there's also anti-Semitic stuff coming out of the Zionist right, in terms of conflating the Israeli state with Judaism or with Jewish people, or attacking non-Zionist Jews as not really Jewish. We're seeing more and more of that as well.
Totally.
Truly, like, just attacking everyone in every direction. It's not.
I've got a Jewish friend in New Zealand who's a Palestinian activist, like Palestine activist, and she got called at a rally recently. Someone called her a fake Jew because, like, she was holding a sign that said, like, this Jew stands with Palestine or something like that. So it's completely. And then Christian Zionism itself, if you get into the full dispensationalist theology, they say that Jewish people need to control the whole Holy Land, and then because they believe it's like happening in these different, what they call dispensations, like God's moving in different ways. What they think will happen after that, which is completely bizarre, and it's a new idea in church history. This idea didn't exist until like 150 years ago, that Christians would be raptured from the world. Like, the true believers would vanish to heaven, and then Jewish people would go through what they call the tribulation, where nations would rise up against them, and basically they'd be obliterated, so that they would turn to Jesus and acknowledge Jesus as their Messiah, which is completely anti-Semitic. Like, to turn them into like a pawn in this apocalyptic vision, and like they need a return. And that's where some people like beckoning war, like a lot of Christian Zionists. It's almost like they love that Iran is this like crazy, like enemy that's coming for them. And the Arab, it's like Islam itself within that paradigm becomes like the force that is like inevitably going to come and turn the Jewish people to Jesus through war. It's to me, it's anti-Semitic to turn Jewish people into a pawn in their political vision,
or
their religious vision,
right? It's absolutely ludicrous to me that we're not able to have a discussion about the motivations of the people funding and backing this from the United States, when it to most people that hear that and go, what? This is insanity. This is monstrous. But everyone instead is made to pretend that it's oh so complex, and all these things are being juggled, and it's really just about self-determination of the Israeli state. And it's like, yeah, you're kidding me. Like, why? When we know that this information is available, like everyone who's looked into, I don't want to use the words done their own research, because that tends to take you to some really bad places.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so don't do that.
Yeah.
But anyone who has actual understanding of how the US Christian right operates and pushes for funding and pushes for arms sales, and funds the settlers to increase the Zionist Israel hold on that area of land. This is what their goal is.
Yeah.
It's
And
to see Palestinians wiped out, a number of other countries decimated, and then to have Israel nuked, essentially.
Yeah, it's nuts. I'd encourage anyone that wants to explore this further. There's a really great documentary by Israeli filmmakers called Till Kingdom Come that explores Christian Zionism and Christian support for Israel. And they follow these pastors from the US, and they follow their support for an Israeli organization. And even in the Israeli organization, they're like, these people are crazy and they believe crazy things about us, but we take their money.
Yeah.
Like, exactly. We smile and nod. And because I think it's made by Israeli filmmakers, you really begin to understand just how anti-Jewish the Christian Zionist thing is. But then on the other side, people like the guy that I visited, who's an Orthodox Jewish settler, who's like completely at odds with ideas like the tribulation and that these Christian Zionist things, of the rapture and what is to come for them. But he's happy to, in the same way, he was kind of probably smiling, and he probably has Christian Zionist visit and he just smiles and nods the way that we did to him, like he'll smile and nod and then go, okay, yeah, cool, give me your money. Yeah, madness.
Terrifying.
Yeah, it is terrifying. And I think the great, and maybe this is where we can like bookend it with or wrap up, is I think like the really important thing here is the voice of Palestinian Christians, and these people that trace their lineage back to Jesus' earliest followers, that have faithfully been witness to the gospel in the Holy Land for millennia. And their voice, there are so many different voices that are so important. You've got, I guess, Christ at the Checkpoint, which is where I visited, which is led by Reverend Dr. Muntha Isaac, who's, I think, a really, really important voice to the church in our time. You've got things like Bethlehem Bible College or Sabeel Liberation Theology Center. And I think their voices are just so, so, so important in this time. And yeah, I think it's on the rest of the church to actually just start listening and do the uncomfortable thing. Like, people need to start, and people are, but more and more coming out strongly, not just Muntha talks about how a lot of Christians pray for Gaza as if it's been hit by a hurricane. That it's not something that's been perpetrated against Gazans. It's
Thoughts
like
and prayers, right? Like,
yeah,
that really Christian evangelical kind of.
And that's just not faithful to the good news. It's not faithful to Jesus. So yeah, I think it's a really important thing for the rest of the church to start listening. I can hear my son calling me, and I think I'm getting summoned. So
was there anything else that the Palestinians you met in the West Bank were saying that people in the West can be doing?
Speaking broadly, I think, yeah, just continuing to do everything we can, demonstrate, meet with our MPs, do, like join vigils, disrupt where you can, like basically like the activism that is already happening. People are really, really encouraged by the university encampments. For Christians, they'll like go and disrupt your church spaces, basically. Like whether they're hardcore, well, if they're hardcore Zionists, why you're there, but the radically neutral churches that are praying for Gaza as if it was hit by a hurricane, not undergoing a genocide. Like, yeah, calling those things out, even if it means you might lose some people from your church. But there's plenty of Zionist churches they can go to. You know, like, but the churches that are in the middle and just radically neutral, they need to start being faithful to the kingdom of God and the king that calls out empire. And right now we've got the empire, decimating Gaza.
Kia ora, James. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Yeah, kia ora. No, glad I could join.
Thank you as well, Mitch.
Yeah, no, it was good. I was just here to take notes.
James, if people want to find you, do you want to be found?
I think you could follow the Gaza Ceasefire Pilgrimages on Instagram at GC Pilgrimages, and I am at James Andrew Harris on Instagram as well.
Something a little bit different this time around for another our midweek podcasts. Thank you to our audience for tuning in to this one. We are trying to get as many people on to share their experiences and expertise as possible, and would really appreciate it if you shared this and let people know that there are people out there having these long, nuanced conversations about what is happening across the world, and particularly in crisis points in places such as Gaza. Everything else is in the summary as per usual. You'll catch us again on the weekend for current events.
If artificers are denied, living a pointless life, but learning all your lessons. Fucking politics, there's no distinction. The road's upon now. It's paved with good intentions, and I'll admit that I'm at a loss for what to say when they criticism is a close we ought to stay. 'Cause I live amongst the people every day in this vindictive, forgetful fucking rain. It feels like we're